Hello, this is Dr. Coulter. I am a speech-language pathologist for the Weiskopf Child Evaluation Center, and I also work for the Autism Center here for the University of Louisville as well. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm so glad you could all join me today. We're going to be talking about the basics overall of augmentative and alternative communication. And if you've looked over the information that's been provided to you beforehand, you'll notice that we got a lot of material to cover today, so I'll be going fairly quickly. Feel free to ask questions at any point through the presentation by typing your questions in the question box on the computer screen and pressing send. I will be answering all questions at the end of the presentation. So, all right, let's get started. Really quickly, I really agree with Thoreau on this. The greatest compliment that was ever paid to me was when someone asked what I thought and attended to my answer. And so I just really appreciate your open-mindedness and listening to this webinar today. Today what we are going to be going over is we're going to be talking about communication, because starting off, AAC really is all about communication. Then we're going to briefly go over what AAC falls under, and that's the category of assistive technology. And then we'll be going in depth about AAC. And as I said before, there's a lot we could cover, but I'm just going to be going over the basics for today. All right, so communication, it's what AAC is all about. Really, we want our children to succeed and be the best they can be. Functional and effective communication is essential to every part of life. So the vision that I have is the same that my governing body, ASHA, has, that making effective communication should be a human right. It should be accessible and achievable for all. So how is communication important to education? I know that several of you may be parents and educators as well. So briefly looking at this is important. Speech and language skills are essential to academic success and learning. Language is really the basis for communication, therefore the basis for education. Reading, writing, gesturing, listening, and speaking are all forms of language, and learning takes place through the process of communication. The ability to communicate with peers and adults in the educational setting is essential for a student to succeed in school. Really, most of you probably know all of those facts already, but it's good to review. So, in the words of a very famous individual in AAC, you have to learn to communicate before you can communicate to learn. So within the educational setting, at home, or within the community, it is essential that individuals actually learn to communicate before they can actually be involved in the learning process. So, what is the definition of communication? Communication is the process of using a shared medium to share ideas, thoughts, and feelings with other people, and having those ideas, thoughts, and feelings understood by the people we're talking with. It really is a process. If you think about it as you're talking to your spouse or your partner, you're speaking with your children, sometimes there's breakdown in that overall process. It is a give and a take, and it also needs to be a shared medium. If I suddenly said to you, Mina-san, konnichiwa, you may have no idea what I said because it may not be a shared medium unless you spoke Japanese. And what I said is, everybody, good afternoon. So, communication requires that all parties have an area of communicative commonality. So, as I stated before, it needs to be that shared medium, but there's a bunch of different means for communication. There are auditory means such as speaking, singing, and sometimes the tone of voice, and the nonverbal physical means such as body language, sign language, paralanguage, touch, eye contact, or the use of writing. A lot of times we assume that people understand what we're saying, but depending on their culture, the auditory means or the nonverbal means may change significantly. So taking those cultural aspects into mind, or bearing that in mind, is also very important, as well as you know, and why we're here, our children on the autism spectrum a lot of times really have difficulty with the auditory perceptual ability, their auditory perceptual abilities, or picking up on those nonverbal cues. So, a good working definition for effective communication is to share meaning and understanding between the person sending the message and the person receiving the message. Is that circle, that overall circle. As you can see here, you've got the sender and you've got the receiver. So communication is a two-way process. The information goes out to a person, and at the other end, obviously, you have the receiver. So there's a sender and receiver in that overall process, and as you know, sometimes there's major breakdowns with our children and loved ones that are on that autism spectrum. From a personal perspective, my brother-in-law is autistic. He's my husband and I take care of him, and very frequently he has to look to me for confirmation of what kind of message I'm sending to him, whether or not he's in trouble. And so, you know, we know that frequently happens with our loved ones, and that's why we're here today. So, is communication a simple skill? Well, that one's an easy one. That's pretty much a rhetorical question. It's a complex skill, and communicating, it is not an isolated series of one skill. It involves several skills. Speaking involves not only getting your message across, but also being able to listen and understand what others are saying. So they're having to use active listening. And as we know, active listening at the best of times is difficult. At the worst times, even more difficult. And then it's observing the verbal and nonverbal cues in order to monitor the effectiveness of your message. So it is a very complex process overall, and that's part of the reason why our children have so many difficulties with it. So, how much is communication through our words alone? And again, this is pretty rhetorical, but it's minimal. And that's part of the reason why it's nice to be able to attend webinars. I'm so glad we have the opportunity of doing this today, but why we not only have the verbal message coming through to you, but also my tone of voice and my voice rising and falling, as well as the visual aspects, so you can take in what I'm saying a little bit better. Verbal communication is only 10 to 30% of the message, and what we're missing quite a bit of even in this is nonverbal communication, which is 70 to 90% of the sent or received message. So it's very significant, and that again is why communication is difficult for our children. So, does a speech and language disorder really affect my student at school? So how is this really coming down, and what's the brass tacks of it? Children with communication disorders frequently do not perform at grade level. They may struggle with reading, have difficulty understanding and expressing language, misunderstand social cues, avoid attending school, show poor judgment, and have difficulty with tests. Sometimes we have to advocate for our children to receive services, and this is part of the reason why we continue to need to advocate for them. Difficulty in learning to speak, listen, read, or write can result from problems in language development. Problems can occur in the production, comprehension, and awareness of language, sounds, syllables, words, sentences, and conversation. Individuals with reading and writing problems may also have trouble using language to communicate, think, and learn. So again, just trying to drive home the overall message that the underpinnings of the message today is all about communication. And AAC is very broad in its applications. So, you know, many times people just have the concept of a device or a particular device in their mind. And so that's why also I'm providing this information for you to help you to broaden your overall take or understanding or paradigm for is a good word to use of what AAC may involve. So a few terms for you just in case you're not aware of those. Within the realm of communication disorders, there's several different terms that people at times are like, what does that mean? And so Coming down from the college mount, this is what these mean. A language disorder is when a person has trouble understanding others. The term for that is receptive language. So they have difficulty understanding words or the communicative message, or sharing thoughts, ideas, and feelings completely. That's expressive language, or the ability to get that message across. Then she or he, excuse me, has a language disorder. So it's difficulty in understanding or using words at the simplest end. And it's not the best simplification, but is a really nice way to wrap your head around it. A speech disorder is what most people think of when they think of communication disorders. It's when a person is unable to produce speech sounds correctly or fluently and has problems with his or her voice, then she has a speech disorder. A lot of times people think about this as their first thoughts about communication disorder or a speech pathologist. They usually think about a speech disorder first of all. But language shouldn't be overlooked, nor should pragmatics. Pragmatics is really a lot of times what we think of, as the first order of reference for individuals that have an autism spectrum disorder. It's using language to greet, inform, demand, promise, or request, or using just various communication functions. And that's what those are. So saying hello, telling people about your day, making a demand that you want orange juice for breakfast, promising to work hard, or requesting something. It's changing your language depending on the needs of the listener situation, or basic code switching. It's not using interesting and inappropriate words when we're speaking with a religious leader or person. It's using respectful language when we're talking with grandma or grandpa, or using less formal words or more informal language with our peers and our friends. It's also following rules for conversation and storytelling, being able to take turns, staying on topic, rephrasing, and also appreciating personal space, being able to be close enough but not too close. It's also using verbal and nonverbal signs, facial expressions, and eye contact. So there's a lot of different ways that we can communicate, and there's a lot of different things to take into consideration. I've listed a few things here for you, but as you can see, it's a very complex activity. So things to think about with regard to communication development. And this is very pertinent, especially for AAC, because a lot of times people don't really have a starting point or an understanding of why a child isn't necessarily ready for a certain device or communication system. And really, a lot of times it comes down to developing that understanding of how to select a device is both a science as well as an art form, as well as looking at an overall context. As we speech pathologists and those of us that work with individuals using AAC, we feel like some regards we're psychologists, we're social workers, we're speech pathologists, and we're also a very good listening ear in what's going on in a person's life. But when it comes down to it, the basis of what we're looking for is a lot of development. And so I've included a lot of information here, but the three terms I really want you to consider and look at within this information are the terms perlocutionary, illocutionary, and locutionary. Perlocutionary basically refers to individuals or children that have communication, because we know that everybody communicates from the time they get out of the womb and then on. So perlocutionary communication is that communication that basically doesn't necessarily have a function other than to let you know something's going on. So it's an example of that would be when you first have a baby. the child cries, and you basically then do the 20 questions through your brain. Are they wet? Have I fed them lately? Let's see, do they need a nap? Do I need to sing them another song? Do we need to go see the doctor? You have all those different questions and apprehensions going through your mind. For some of our children, again, on the autism spectrum, or some of our lower functioning individuals, they also respond in that same way. It doesn't seem to be any intent to their communication. They're making sounds, they're making noises, but you are really struggling to figure out what is associated with that. That's a lot of times when we start doing functional behavioral analysis or looking for associations in the environment. But really, that's that overall crux of perlocutionary information. One thing I want you to identify is look at the age range, the corresponding developmental range that goes along with that stage. And just keep that in the back of your mind. The next stage then is that illocutionary stage. That's when there starts to be some deliberate intent or deliberate communication, but there isn't symbolic use of communication yet. There is that use of some arm gesturing, and yes, that can be considered symbolic. Don't hang me out to dry there. But there's some gestures and so forth that go along with the communication. It's when our children start holding their arms up to be picked up. They start using more inflection. You can differentiate what their cries are. That's where you get into that illocutionary stage. But they aren't using symbols. And that's when we get to the symbol stage or symbolic stage, that's when we get to the locutionary stage. That's when they're starting to use actual words or symbols to represent something. All right, so the locutionary stage is really, again, when children are using those actual reference for something else. All right, so again, we think about those things as we're doing an AAC evaluation, and as a parent or as a provider, those are things to be thinking about as well. And again, think about those developmental, let's go back one slide, think about those developmental ages when you're thinking about those as well. It's a nice frame of reference. Another thing I want to point out to you is that if you are a provider, you probably already are aware of this, that children don't start recognizing real pictures and making an association between a real picture and an object until they're approximately 18 to 24 months of age. So again, just kind of, again, thinking a little bit more broadly, and if you're thinking about specific children in your life or on your caseloads, this may help you to problem solve maybe why that individual is struggling to establish communication or where to start with that individual with regard to communication. So going on to the next step, or the next part of our chat, we're going to be talking about assistive technology. And the reason why I'm talking about assistive technology is because it's the overall umbrella for AAC. And it's why legally assistive technology is why we're able to provide AAC for our children. Assistive technology is one of the services that can be provided in a special education program under the IDEA. The requirements of the IDEA state that students who need assistive technology are entitled to the aids and devices and the assistive technology services that are necessary for the student to benefit from a free, appropriate public education. So this is what gives us the right to identify those needs and to follow up on those needs. And this is the reason why we're able to request these services of the schools, and the school is actually able to then provide those services for your children. So some examples of AT devices. It's a very broad category. It's everything from motorized wheelchairs or manual wheelchairs, AAC devices, reaching and grabbing aids, ramps, lifts, grab bars, adaptive vehicles. AT involves everything from devices for very young children all the way up to the geriatric or elderly population. Assistive technology enables people with disabilities to participate fully in every aspect of life, at school, work, at home, and in the community. Again, it's very broad and involves everything from sensory adaptations or devices for individuals with sensory disorders, all the way through to mobility issues, all the way to communication disorders, and even supports for reading and writing, and those various supports to help individuals all the way into their careers and when they get older. So as you can see, AAC falls under AT. And the other reason why this is important to remember is because when you think about AAC, this is the way your insurance company thinks about it. So you got to bear that into mind, that, you know, yes, we're dealing with communication, but when you're talking to your pediatrician or your insurance company, they're thinking AT. All right. So we're going to move along. AAC is assistive technology. It's any item, service, or strategy that an individual with disabilities uses to help them to be more successful or more independent at work, home, school, or the community, as I stated before. So what is AAC? It's augmentative and alternative communication for individuals with complex communication needs. The term complex communication needs comes from ISAC, which is the International Association or Society, excuse me, for Augmentative and Alternative Communication. By the way, as a really quick plug, I know this may date this webinar, but they're going to be having a their international meeting at Pittsburgh this year. So if you have further interest, you feel free to go to Pittsburgh and see people from all over the world. But that is the term complex communication needs. That is a term that is used to describe individuals that are either nonverbal or are in need of AAC. So when does a child need AAC? Well, they may need it to augment natural speech production. They may need it to provide a means for communication when other means are not available or diminished. They may need it to promote speech and language development. They may need it to address written communication or text needs when handwriting is impaired. And again, this may broaden your perspective of what AAC involves. The other thing I want to note is that natural speech production is still used. So, and that's something we may address a little bit later if time permits. But a lot of times people think, oh, my child only or my individual should only use this AAC device. They shouldn't use their natural speech. No, 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 no. As Asha states, and I believe we'll get to that later, the multimodal approach is the best approach for children and for individuals using AAC. Natural speech is still a part of their communication system. So, when does a child need AAC? Just clarifying again, a child whose speech is not developing within the realm of what is considered normal, or is not likely to develop normal speech due to a pre-existing condition is a potential candidate for AAC. So that involves the children with childhood apraxia speech. You know, it may be a temporary need. Some of our children with ASD that we see here, it may be a temporary need for them as well. But without that, they may never have developed verbal communication, or they may never have a means to communicate at all. So that comes to our second clarification. Even when it's unclear whether or not a child will eventually develop normal speech, and this is frequently the case, the child may still benefit from AAC. So, in addition, recent research has supported that the use of augmentative communication encourages natural speech production. I've seen this myself numerous times. It provides a bridge in many ways. You know, again, the child may still depend on the AAC system, but I've seen improvement in some individuals not all, but some individuals, natural verbal communication. A lot of times, very often, it's only familiar individuals that see, are able to understand them a little bit better, and in the community, they may still need that AAC device, but any improvement to any degree is always a bonus for all of us. In some instances, augmentative communication devices serve as an interim communication strategy, and that's what we mentioned before. So, AAC is a means to enhance overall communication effectiveness, and natural communication will always be encouraged and will remain an integral aspect of the total communication or multimodal approach, and that's straight from ASHA, again, my governing body. And one thing I also want to point out is that communication is always a two-way street. Again, we're not just talking about sending out a message, but also receiving messages. Many of our children with autism have so much difficulty understanding verbal communication. I have several of my clients that want me to actually use their device to communicate with them. And they understand that communication that I'm giving to them because they are able to see it on their device or in their communication system overall. But if I only spoke with them verbally, they wouldn't be able to understand that system. So don't just limit your understanding to AAC as being a means for expression. It also is a very important means for understanding communication, just as you and I rely very heavily on hearing other people to understand what they're saying. The same way, you don't want to chop off the individual's ears by, again, not providing them a means to understand the world around them. So, and just some statistics for you. The other reason why this is so important is 30 to 50% of children with autism will remain in that nonverbal category overall. They may have some vocalizations to augment their overall communication message, but they will remain in that overall nonverbal category. And I know that the CDC just upped their statistics again for the prevalence of autism. And so that just magnifies this overall issue. So let's talk about some myths about augmentative and alternative communication. And I'm sure that you've heard a number of these. One myth is that AAC is a last resort in speech-language intervention. It should never be a last resort. If you're thinking about it as a last resort, then you're basically denying that child the ability to communicate and to develop communication. An example of this is a child that I have on my caseload who's 12 years old, and he has an understanding of language at approximately a 7-year level, but was never encouraged to really utilize his communication device until Mom and I got our hands on him and worked with him, and he had never developed sentence structure and his overall language organization abilities or understanding of categories and so forth. And if you think of a child that's around 6 or 7 years of age and how much they communicate and how much complexity they have in their sentence development, and this child was only using occasionally a word-and-word utterance. And to me, that is a result of that thinking of AAC as a last resort. The child does have childhood apraxia speech. And it just breaks my heart to think that he could be using such beautiful, complex communication, but because he missed some of those developmental milestones, that has limited him at this point. So don't treat it as a last resort. Use it as a first line of defense in helping to develop communication. Another myth, AAC hinders or stops further speech development. We've talked about this already, and research has shown time and time and again, my personal experience has shown time and time again, that it in no way hinders, but supplements and supports speech development. Another myth, children must have a certain set of skills to be able to benefit from AAC. there is no set of skills. Even though we've talked about the perlocutionary, illocutionary, and locutionary stages, every individual, and we know that every individual is communicating at some level. It's just a matter of coming up with a system that meets that individual's needs and coming up with a system that is appropriate for that individual. Even we don't give up on our children when they're crying, our infants when they're crying, just because we don't understand what they want. We don't deny them a bottle. So I know that's kind of an extreme example, but it's something to take into thought. Another myth, speech-generating AAC devices are only for children with intact cognition. This is not necessarily true. Again, it's a process. Identifying what is best for the child is a process. And I've got several individuals, and I know my colleagues also have numerous individuals that they could identify as well that may be functioning at a lower level, but are able to utilize a dynamic display device or a speech generating device of some sort, and that they're just blooming. Their communication abilities are blossoming. It doesn't say that every individual that is limited should receive that. Again, it's a process and should be taken in consideration. The final myth we're going to talk about is children have to be a certain age to be able to benefit from AAC. Again, I think we've already established that it should be, the need for AAC should be identified as early as possible in some sort of communication system, whether it be object-based or touch-based, whatever, just even associated location-based should be implemented as quickly and as soon as possible. And no piece of equipment in and of itself eliminates a delay in language development. Excuse me for the typo. If somebody tries to sell you a piece of equipment or tries to sell you something saying that your child will be cured, they are like that little rat thief that's walking across the screen. It does not solve the child's language development issues. It can help support their language development, but just as with any sorts of, if somebody's trying, just be very cautious. I'm trying to lead you guys towards caution in somebody trying to sell you something, because they will say it eliminates the difficulties with language development, or if they have a mental disability, that it will eliminate that. It will not take place or cure that cognitive deficit or disability in an individual, but it will help enhance their abilities to the point that they're capable of. All right, I just need to make that clarification, because there's a lot of talk lately, especially, and there's a lot of excitement in these current days because of the technologies that are out there. And I applaud that, but I just, again, want to lead everyone to a bit of caution on that. So what are the prerequisites for using AAC? I think we've already established that there's none. There is absolutely none. So there's no reason why AAC should not be considered for every child, no matter where they are or what their needs are. Again, it's just a matter of getting that fit for that child. So, as we stated before, AAC intervention is the process of enhancing and optimizing daily functional communication across all communicative contexts. I recommend that frequently when I do evaluations for children, and that's something that many of us try to support, is that process of enhancing and optimizing daily functional communication across various contexts. We know our children with autism sometimes have difficulties with generalizing communication, so we need to think about using it consistently, whatever system is established, using it consistently across all contexts. And it does need to be functional, and it does need to be daily. And when we're talking about enhancing and optimizing, we're also talking about the whole aspect of providing opportunities for our children to communicate. And that's where I think one of the biggest stumbling blocks that I've found for families as I've worked with them is they think, oh, once the communication system, my child gets this communication system, they'll be able to communicate. No, it's a process. It's process. And let's go to the next point, and it'll clarify a little bit. This process takes time as well as hours of work by the augmented communicator and the team of stakeholders. Stakeholders are family members, teachers, whoever is working with a child, providing and supporting the needed intervention and follow-up activities and services. It takes a lot of time because you're training a new skill. So it's not something that's going to be automatic or accepted, because if a child isn't necessarily understanding that they need to use communication to interact with others, that's the first thing you need to do is train that skill, that communication is necessary and that it's motivating and that it's a good thing, and it's not just something they do. Well, sometimes it is just something they do because they know they got to do it for those of us in their lives. But hopefully it becomes an enjoyable activity for them in the future. But that's the hardest part, and that I share with parents and also with other providers, is getting through that big step of moving to retraining your own activities in your day, or retraining your lifestyle. And a lot of times I tell parents it's like me joining Weight Watchers. I have to, change my eating habits, and it's hard. And some days I do well, some days I don't do so well, but it's a lifestyle change, and I have to change it wherever I go and eat. And you have to kind of sometimes think about communication in the process of adding something new in that communication environment, or enriching that communication. Kind of have to reframe it in that same way, that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay that it's difficult, to validate that, yeah, this is going to be difficult, but you can move forward in that. So next point, developing or redeveloping functional communication skills involves the use of multimodal communication strategies based on each individual. Again, I believe we've touched on that already. Again, it can be verbal, it can be text, it could be the nonverbal gestures. It's wherever that individual is. That is, clarification here, an augmentative communicator may learn to communicate using varied approaches, including speech, communication boards, signs, gestures, and high-tech devices. Again, it's just whatever the individual needs. So, looking at the details and coming to understand the various terms for AAC, first let's talk about the range. There is a range for AAC overall, and I've alluded to it several different times when we've talked about the different developmental stages from prolocutionary to illocutionary, and briefly talked about the development of when individuals understand or recognize real pictures. But the range goes from no tech all the way to high tech. Very quickly, no tech, another term for that, and again, this is where a lot of people kind of start getting a little bit, stumble on a few things. Another term that's pretty synonymous for no tech is unaided. So most people, when they think of AAC, they think of more of the aided end of the spectrum, but unaided forms of AAC are also imperative as well. That is what I've mentioned before: vocalizations, gestures, ASL, signs. Eye blinks are also unaided forms of AAC, and those are very important for our children. Aided forms are also important as well, but basically those are the forms of or communication systems that involve something beyond the body. So you've got the body alone, and then you've got beyond the body. That is the aided forms. That's everything from no tech to high tech devices. No tech devices involve things like picture communication. And one thing really quickly, Just a clarification, because a lot of times this is another thing that a term that people get really confused by. Picture exchange is a training protocol. It is not the use of pictures. A lot of times people say, oh, my child uses PECs. Oh, so they're using that training protocol currently. That means a whole nother thing versus using single meaning pictures, which is using a real picture on like a visual schedule. That's a completely different, that's a visual support versus, you know, a child using a single meaning picture that they have a choice on. That's very different from the protocol or the training system based on discrete trial training for picture exchange. All right. So that is a low-tech end of things. You can also use an alphabet board, communication notebook, head sticks. Those are all low-tech options. Light-tech or mid-tech is the other term. A lot of times is now more or less, there's lots of controversy about this, but that's more, people a lot of times include that with low-tech. But then you've got the other end of the spectrum, high-tech, which is basically your computerized programs or computerized devices. All right, so there's the basic range of those, and that obviously comes from Hill. So let's talk about the various features of some of these systems, because again, what we're wanting to establish or provide for individuals is, I'm going to go back one slide, a system overall, whether it involves some no-tech means for communication or it involves a high-tech device. What we want to have is something of a system overall that is individualized and specific for the child. Because if you've met one child with autism, you guys can finish this sentence for me. You've met one child with autism. Basically, what their needs are going to be, it's going to be very individualized, but may involve various aspects of either a no-tech or a high-tech system. And it also may change and progress throughout their lifetime. So again, try not to get too stuck on or get stuck in one end or the other end of the overall range of technology that's out there. But consider all the entire range. So looking at the features, these are just descriptors. Just as when you're thinking about buying a car, and yes, I really like that car, but I think it's computer generated. I don't even know if it's real. But as you're thinking about buying a car, you're going to look for various features. Obviously, you want air conditioning, or you want a heater. Then, you know, then you're looking at Bluetooth, or you're looking at, you know, power windows, power steering, diesel. Yes, there are diesel cars out there. Different things like that, or what their fuel efficiency is. The same way we look for the details in a vehicle, you need to think about the various features or aspects of a communication system. All right. And generally, the selection of the most appropriate communication is a process of matching the abilities and needs of the user to the features of that AAC device or system overall. All right. That's the meaning or the underlying meaning of providing the best fit. So what are the different features that need to be considered? You want to think about communication potential. And I hate to say this, but this is kind of a brass tacks issue in that it comes, in some regards, it comes down to insurance, especially if more of a high-tech device is in consideration, because typically your federally supported or state-supported insurance providers only supply a new device every 5 years. So, and also it's important to think about just from a logistics standpoint of you don't want to be having to remake something every time you turn around. If the child is really rapidly progressing, you want to be prepared ahead of time. So thinking about the potential or the rate of progress that a child is making cognitively or communicatively is very important, because you are going to be having to prepare a lot. If the child is developing a lot of different communication functions in a lot of different environments, or their vocabulary is really expanding quickly, you're going to have to prepare a lot ahead of time, or you're going to have to think about what kind of device is this child going to need 5 years down the road. And that's sometimes daunting to think about, but that's why you want to get something that does provide a lot for a child in any way or means. Then you need to think about your access options. Access basically means how the child selects the item or the symbol that they're looking for. So whether it's an object, they're going to obviously be grabbing that with their hand, but some individuals are unable to utilize their hands due to mobility issues. So then you're going to have to think about, are they going to be able to point to it using their eyes, using eye gaze? A lot of our children with autism, I've noticed as I've been working with them, are able to use direct selection, which means they're able to touch or point to or grab, but a lot of times our children also have fine motor issues or may have other comorbid or other diagnoses at the same time. And access really needs to be taken into consideration when there is a mobility issue. And then you also, besides a speech pathologist or assistive technology professional, you also need to get an occupational or physical therapist involved as well, get their input, so that you may have the child accessing their device in the best possible way. Sometimes it can be a very simple solution such as key guards, but it's something to think about. The next thing to be considered is, within features, is the symbol system. When thinking about the symbol systems, again, it goes back to what we were talking about previously as far as where they are, as far as their symbolic understanding, that perlocutionary, illocutionary, locutionary stage, or do they recognize real pictures? Do they recognize objects as being associated with an event, such as bringing a cup to you, or in some cases, some of my little friends like to throw them at their parents to identify that they want something to drink. The display, how big does the display need to be? The device output, does it need to be digitized voice, which is a voice recording? Does it need to be synthesized voice, which is the computer-generated voice? Do they need to email? Do they need Bluetooth? Do they need infrared for being able to control, the remote control or different environmental controls? Portability, is a child ambulatory, meaning are they able to walk? Or does it need to be attached to the wheelchair? Compatibility. Compatibility is a very big issue in that, just like with some of the Microsoft stuff, is it proprietary? You can only use their operating system, or is it a Windows-based system? Do you have to get updates, upgrades? Is it a dedicated or computer-based device? I know some of the Tobii systems are basically more like a tablet with the software loaded on it, versus more of the PRC devices are dedicated. Both are dedicated devices, don't get me wrong, but the formats are quite a bit different. Durability is a very big thing, especially with our iPads and iPhones, and supports, tech support is very important, as well as cost. So those are some of the basic features. Couple terms for you really quickly. Static is a display. It's more with low to mid-tech devices. Means you got to do the work and change the overall display. The picture communication boards are considered static. A dynamic display system is what we see oftentimes with more of our computer-based systems. All right, and a few more terms for you, just because sometimes it can get rather confusing. Single meaning pictures, you've heard me mention it. Each picture means one word. So one picture of a cookie means cookie. It doesn't mean anything else. Alphabet-based systems is basically spelling, word prediction, and letter codes. A semantic compaction system is based on multi-meaning icons. It's difficult to explain here, but basically it's layers of meaning. For example, an apple can mean eat. It can also mean food in general. A book can mean book. It can mean read. It can mean literacy. It can mean writing. It can mean multiple different things. So vocabulary, very, very quickly, and looking at that. Things to think about again, and you know, a lot of times people are like, where do I start with identifying what vocabulary needs to be on my child's device? Again, that goes back to individualizing it for each person. You know, core and fringe vocabulary is an important topic to think about and consider, but again, you need to think about where your individual is or your child is, and you need to think about the communication functions in their environments. Core and fringe vocabulary really comes into play with our general communication in and of itself. When we're communicating with each other, you know, 50% of our words, excuse me, every day of the words that we communicate are encompassed by 50 words alone. Going down the list, if you had 80% of all the words that you spoke in a day, it would be encompassed by 400 words alone, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. So if you're wanting to get the biggest bang for your buck, if you're an interventionist or a parent alone and you're like, where do I start? A good way to frame it or think about it is thinking about those core words and that core vocabulary. And if you're wondering what core vocabulary is, I didn't include an email address or excuse me, a URL on this, but Prinky Romick has a lot of information on this, as well as the University of Nebraska. And I've got some websites at the end, and I'll put a link on my website as well as my wiki for you to gain more information about that. Moving along, other lists that are very beneficial that I did include the URLs on are the preschool non-disabled children vocabulary list, and then also Dolch word list. If you're an educator, you know about Dolch. But here is a frequency list for toddlers. As you can see, overall 96.3% of their words were encompassed by these 23 words alone, which is just amazing. And really to bring it home a little bit more, and to really kind of help you to understand why this is applicable, fewer than 5% of all the words used by toddlers are picture producers. So you're thinking about what kind of vocabulary should I use, or you're thinking about, okay, I know I want to use a picture communication system with this child, not PECS, but a picture communication system with this child. How in the world do I select these? Well, that's again where core vocabulary can be very important because, for an example, I'm going to show you a very, very quick video because we got about 5 minutes. I think I got enough time to squeeze it in just to kind of drive this home. And I'm going to take my headset so you can hear it a little bit better. But in this video, there's a child and communicating. It's very cute, and that's the other reason why I wanted to show this to you guys pretty quickly. We're getting set up here. All right. Just give us a moment, and we're going to get this going. You may hear some rustling really quickly. And that's just me taking the headphones off. So here's this child on this video. Tell me what you just said.
I like you when you give me cookies.
You like me when I give you cookies, but you don't like me all the time?
Yeah, no.
Why?
Well, I like you, only love you, get cookies from me.
Oh, so only when I give you cookies do you like me?
Yeah.
Oh, Okay, I love you.
I love you too, but I like you all the time.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm sure we've got some laughter out there. At least I hope we do. But and thank you to a wonderful presenter from PRAC for giving me this example. But as you can see, if you think about it, and if you looked, you transcribe this entire thing out, which I've done, if you look at this whole entire transcript, the only thing you can really make a picture for is the word cookies. And where in the world would you be stuck with communication if you can only use the word cookies? But if you look at core vocabulary lists, you can actually provide a significant amount of more communication. You have 16 out of 36 of these words, which is 44%, which is, I'm just trying to drive home the point that you need to be open-minded when it comes to using different formats for vocabulary. Quickly moving on, things to consider, things to think about that I may not have mentioned before, thinking about, can the child intentionally communicate? Are they perlocutionary? Thinking about those sorts of things. Can the child use different means of communication? Oops, typo again. Sorry about that. Communication should be taught in a natural environment with focus on the learner to promote communication in a functional way, and should it be in a caring atmosphere, multimodal, multi-component, encourage closeness and worth of the individual. The child should have readiness to learn, joint attention, shared focus, use lots of auditory signals to get their attention. It should be child-centered but parent-guided. There should be nice natural consequences. Motor planning is a good thing to bear in mind so they're not having to search all over, and consider using core vocabulary. All right. There's several different strategies that if you're an SLP you're familiar with, but as a parent those are things to think about as well. So as we wrap up, there's several different services. Obviously, I head up the U of L AAC clinic, but I want to give you some websites that you can look at. Some of them are definitely in progress, so bear with me as I continue to clean them up and work on them. But send me an email if you have further questions or if you'd like to see something else on these websites. One is my own personal. Yes, that is an old picture of me, but that's me. That is my AAC at U of L website, and feel free to pop on there. I try to keep upcoming events listed there. You can see today is listed. And there's also, I try to keep that updated with webinars and other good stuff that's coming out, as well as I'm going to be including other tech information and just information about stuff that I get from Disability Scoop. So put that in your favorites box, and I'd appreciate that. Other things that are I head up and I lead are the Louisville AAC Providers Consortium. There's a group of us from, as you can see, I actually don't have all the different providers that are in the consortium listed there. I'm still working on this website, and not everybody's information there is there. It is in progress and in work, but we've provided lots of links and lots of information. There are a lot of people in the community that are able to provide these services. And you can see that there's even schools that are listed there. So it's been exciting and been fun to be a part of the group. And if you are a provider, feel free to come in and join us. We are having a meeting next this month on the 22nd at Kids Center at 5 p.m. So if you want to join us, be sure to come. And finally, it's a wiki page that I've also established that also provides some of the same information. So I've also given a list of different websites through the courtesy of ASHA. These aren't inclusive, and I'm not endorsing anybody specifically, but it's just some helpful sites that you may find useful as well. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I believe it's time to answer some questions. Or maybe not. Oh, how would a parent go about getting their child assessed for an AAC device? Well, the first thing you need to do is obviously I would contact one of the individuals that you saw listed in the AAC providers group, And basically, it starts with your pediatrician and getting a referral to that individual. You know, if you need more specifics or you have further questions on what that AAC process looks like, feel free to email me. I'd be happy to answer any of those questions. You know, I'm not trying to endorse myself here, but definitely any of us would be happy, especially in our AAC group, any of us would be happy to see your child or to help you through that overall process. But best practices does state that in what I try to do, and I know a number of my other colleagues do, is that we see you for the assessment, then we take you through the overall, basically the next steps, which include training, as well as you have to go through a selection process if the child does need a device specifically, or does the best fit would be a device. You have to go through a selection process of at least 2 different devices. That's mandated through the insurance companies. And then after that and through that whole process, again, training and follow-up so that you're comfortable with the device, your child's comfortable with the device, and that it's not abandoned. Because unfortunately, the abandonment rate for devices or communication systems in general is 70% currently, which is just a travesty. And you know, part of my research and part of my job and working with the university is to see that number come down and to work towards that number coming down. So it would benefit you to talk to some of these other professionals or email me. Either way would be great, and that's a great place to start. Doesn't look like we have any other questions. Looks like I answered them all within the presentation. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. And